Hey, Thomas Westbrook here, and you're watching Atheist Edge.
Hi, welcome to Atheist Edge. I'm Courtney here with Chris.
Hello.
And we wanted to have a little bit of a segment on the proposition that that atheists are actually believers, but they move away from religion just because they feel like sinning all of the time.
Yeah, I don't know what it was, but I think I missed a memo or something a couple weeks ago. 'Cause, I talk to people in real life, Facebook, Reddit, various avenues, and just all of a sudden, everyone at once came at me with this same suggestion, the idea that atheists, deep down, they really know that God exists, right? But they have to deny him because they're so dedicated to their sinful ways. They don't want to stop drinking or sexing or whatever they want to do.
That's not fair. Doesn't this have like a scriptural basis of that, something about God being like written on our hearts or something?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to figure out, because it's like, okay, in order to recognize it isn't true, you just have to talk to a couple atheists. Like,
right.
I mean, among our group, we know people who have read the Bible and realize its flaws and contradictions and human origins, and they lost their faith that way. Or people who have these existential crises and come at things with like logic and reason and realize, and they think that God is illogical, that doesn't stand up to intellectual rigor.
Right.
And there's all kinds of reasons why someone could become an atheist, aside from just, denying stuff they already know.
Right.
So I was trying to figure out, okay, if this is so obvious to us that this isn't true, why do people keep bringing it up? And people kept bringing me to this particular passage in Romans 1. So I wanted to kind of look at that today, kind of take it down bit by bit and see, okay, does this even make sense from a biblical perspective? Are they even reading the Bible properly?
Okay.
And if they are, can we address this somehow?
Yeah.
So the verses I'm focusing on starts in Romans 1, starting with verse 18. And to be clear, right off the bat, this passage is not even talking about atheists per se. It's specifically referring to idolaters, people who have left God and turned to idols instead.
Okay.
So right away, the context isn't about atheists, but that the connection is made, okay, atheists have made science into an idol, or they've made Richard Dawkins into an idol or something like that. So they take it kind of metaphorically, but if we stopped at the idol thing, we wouldn't have a video. So,
so is that also the like people becoming their own gods? Is that the same thing, or is that kind of separate?
It doesn't really say that per se. Like I said, it says they're specifically turning to things that they have made.
Okay.
I'm sure. If they're making an analogy to science, they can make an analogy to their own selfishness, their own pride as well. But I just want to look at this and see, okay, well, what are these Christians getting at, and is there any kind of merit whatsoever to what they're saying?
Right.
So if we start in verse 18, Paul comes right out the bat, and he says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them.
Okay.
For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse."
It says invisible, but
His
clearly
invisible
seen.
attributes have been clearly seen.
Since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes.
His eternal power, divine nature. They're trying to say that there's stuff in nature that points to God, basically. And
yeah, that's a really common assertion too.
yeah,
like,
it's the just look at the trees, look at the
exactly.
stars.
Look at the sunset. That means God. Like, but which one and why? Like that's the biggest question for me.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, people have been looking at the sky for millennia, and they keep seeing whatever pantheon they already believe in.
Exactly.
I mean, there's a reason why our planets are not named after the apostles.
Right.
Right. They're named after the Roman gods. And
yeah. Also, we did a segment long time ago. If you're an Atheist Edge, veteran, then you may know this. It's one of our early videos. we did a segment on epileptic seizures, and certain ones in the midbrain. I think it was the hypothalamus. But if you had a seizure in that part of the brain, it would create this delusion that was so real, and a lot of people reported seeing God, but the gods that they saw were different gods. You see this across cultures, and if you believe in Buddha, or if you believe in Allah or in Yahweh, then those are the gods that you saw. So a lot of these like seizures are sometimes seen as like proof of God when you have a near-death experience or when you have seizures and all these things. And that's kind of the proof of that is oh, look, this person went to the other side and they saw this God. But if that were true, if it was a real place, then you would, it would be consistent. You'd see the same thing and talk to the same people and have the same experiences, but you don't. And same thing with like alien stuff it's really oftentimes traced back to a certain movie someone saw when they were young, or images in comic books and stuff like that. So there's psychology is so messy, and like when your brain is under a lot of stress, like a seizure, or it's under drugs or whatever, then it has to grab at things that is already in the head.
Yeah, it's all part of the subset of things that people don't understand that they give supernatural agency or origin to.
And that's basic psychology.
Yeah, and it's we've had generations of people who see their own pantheons in the heavens, but now we have astronomy has really come into its own as a science, and cosmology, and we're learning so much about the universe that is really cool on its own without appealing to a supernatural entity as the source of it all. And of course there's stuff we don't know, but if you want to commit God the gaps and say God is in that stuff we don't know, okay, but I hope you look at the history of science and astronomy and see all the stuff that we thought was God that we now know is not God, which is the exact opposite of what Paul is trying to say here.
And I don't want to get too far off topic, but just one little thing, that this claim of when people hear that you're an atheist and they're a staunch believer, often one of the first questions they ask is, well, where did this all come from, and where did we how did we get here? And it's the thing that's so striking about that question is that the only reason they're asking it is because their worldview seems to think that it has an answer, and it doesn't mean that as human beings basing ourselves in evidence that we have to have an answer for that. Even if we weren't as advanced as we are in science and we know a lot about this kind of topic, there's a lot that we don't know. But even if we didn't, it doesn't mean that this this conclusion brought up by these religious texts has any base in reality. It would, if you could take the conclusion first and draw back the evidence, then maybe we would be able to substantiate some of the claims that are made. But it doesn't hold up. Creationism is completely ridiculous.
Yeah, sometimes it's better to admit that you don't know something than to make an assumption and wind up with an incorrect answer.
Yeah.
Because your answers are going to affect, okay, now that we have an answer, where do we go from there? And it could lead you to inappropriate actions, false conclusions, and a whole train of thought that just from its very basis was based on a flawed concept.
Right.
Anyways, moving on from that, Paul continues on to say, for even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools. And this kind of connects with the Psalms that say, the fool says in their heart there is no God. And I don't know exactly what worldly wisdom Paul is getting at here. He was very well versed in Greek philosophy. Maybe he was talking about the philosophy of his day, logic and reason that were kind of undergirding the more popular understanding that what the people who were presenting this to me are putting in terms of science. Like, it's a way of saying, oh, you think you're so smart with your science and book learning and whatnot, and they think they have some sort of divine knowledge that trumps all that, which I guess I can't say that they don't, but they kind of got to put up or shut up at some point.
Yeah.
And,
And yeah, like if you have a conclusion, then, or if you have a conclusion before you have any evidence of it, then it doesn't mean anything. It's an assertion. And if you have a hypothesis, that's an open question that can be tested. You know, if it's just an idea, then it's not even a hypothesis because it's not testable, and you're kind of screwed from square one.
mm-hmm. And if you want to, whether you want to take this as a dig on, logic, reason, science, philosophy, what have you, there are people who came to believe in Christianity through all these means. Christian apologetics is an entire field that tries to use logic and reason and evidence to point to the conclusion of God being real and Jesus resurrected. So if you want to take this wisdom of the world as foolishness, you can't do that without denigrating your fellow Christians who actually value it and who use it. We would disagree with their conclusions, of course, but I think we would respect their at least going through the steps of having a rational basis for their faith.
Yeah. Intellectual honesty, I think, is always a really good place of truth to start from.
Mm-hmm.
So, you can have your doubts, and you can be questioning things, but people holding on to their faith and having it be meaningful to them, that's a really wonderful thing. But if you start to value what's actually true versus what is giving you comfort or what has come from your history as something traditional, then that's kind of where you end up where we are, where you've kind of mapped out these different things and you value what's actually true versus just accepting something that you were brought up in. And that's not everybody that's a believer, but it's a very hefty majority.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely, since I've been getting involved with our Atheist Christian Book Club and I'm getting more involved in these discussions, I would much rather, as much as I disagree with the conclusions, I would rather talk with a Christian who has come to the faith through logic and reason than someone who just says, God said it, I believe it, that settles it.
Yeah,
Just from a base level of, I respect you as a person.
Yeah.
But so Paul says this, and then he goes on a whole list of behaviors that these people, through their wanton rejection of God, that they know is real, but their rejection of him, it leads them to all kinds of behaviors. And one thing that struck me about this is that it keeps using the phrase, God gave them over. He says, God gave them over to the lusts of their hearts, in the lust of their hearts to impurity. God gave them over to degrading passions. God gave them over to a depraved mind. So God's...
Sounds very sexual.
There's a lot of it in there too. I mean, and this is the same passage that talks about, a man lying with a man, and this is where, a lot of anti-homosexual rhetoric comes from. This is that same section of Romans.
Ooh, but it kind of suggests God gave them over to it, which means that God put them there, right?
Yeah, and it's
not saying God lost their admiration or something.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch. This is really troubling to me for a number of ways.
Yeah.
Because I don't know how your church experience was growing up, but in my church, we always had these people come and talk to us who have these really compelling testimonies of, they were gang members, they're doing white collar crime, they were doing drugs, and in the depths of their depravity, God came to them and he brought them out of it.
Okay.
So, and the suggestion was that you can never be bad enough or sinful enough that God cannot reach out to you and bring you out of it.
Okay.
But yet we have these passages, and it seems to be saying the exact opposite.
Around, yeah.
And God said, okay, you want to sin, I'll let you sin, have at it. So that there's two contrary messages there, and I don't know where to take it.
But that phrase of gave them over to that, it's not even a choice, it doesn't seem like. To me, that sounds like, because it's a difference between letting them go of their own free will and giving them over to it. That's like, a possession that's being given over, like, slavery or something, of, you know, this is my property and I'm giving it over to you. You know what I mean? Like, so it doesn't really seem like there's any agency in the human being in that instance.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't read it that way, but my way isn't much better. Doesn't really speak for God much better. Like, you ever have people who, when like if we're talking about hell and how, you know, how could a loving God ever condemn anyone to hell? And the response is, well, God does not send anyone hell. People choose to be separate from God, and God just gives them what they want. So I kind of read this that same way. God's saying, okay, you want to lie with a man as with a woman? Okay, I'll let you do that. Have fun with
That's
that.
the free will part.
That could be the free will part, but once again, that was why my original objection, that's why that came to mind. It's like, okay, God's giving these people up to their sin, but he goes to other people when they're sinning and magnanimously appears to them in their times of need to inspire them to get out of it.
Yeah.
So you kind of have both angles being played here, and I don't know which one is more orthodox than the other.
Yeah, when I was a believer, I justified the concept of hell with this idea that, you know, that given that idea that that at the end everyone will have a very clear choice, and you either choose one or the other. And I felt like nobody would ever choose hell if they are given all of the revelation that they would need to clearly make that decision. So I felt like even if you spend your entire life without the revelation of God, which would not be your fault, at least at the end of your life, you're given this revelation, and anyone who clearly understands that choice would choose that. And so my idea was that when I was like, you know, 10 or 13, was that given that idea, God is choosing, has to choose to give you that revelation. And because nobody would choose it, hell is kind of a place for like the devil and his like demons, and that no children of God go to hell. So that was kind of, but it wasn't based in any scriptural thing. It wasn't based in anything anybody else had taught me about anything. It was just my own like logic of trying to figure out how can this all fit together, like this kind of cognitive dissonance. You know, this is how I remedy the idea of hell. So that was that.
All this is to say that I don't even think people who are using this passage of Romans as their reason for saying atheists are secret closet believers. I don't think it makes any sense even from just reading the passage.
Well, no, it assumes that we believe that God, that this specific God exists, let alone any God. Yeah, and that's kind of what I said to the radio host.
Now, the one thing that I did realize kind of as I was pondering this is that, you know, like you've been a part of the atheist movement longer than I have. You've dealt with a wide variety of people. It seems to me that there are some people, especially coming from like the more strict Christian backgrounds, like that they lose their faith and then they just go crazy with how they act out in the real world.
Right. Yeah. This Psalms 14:1. Same thing, abominable deeds.
Yeah, there is none who does good. It's pretty unequivocal, and but you know, you see these people, they get out in the real world and they don't know how to conduct themselves, like, and I won't say to these people maybe the desire to get out of their strict upbringing is not an influence on their leaving the faith. But it may not be the prime reason for leaving it. It's just like a handy dandy side benefit of it. Like to flip it on Christianity, it would be like saying Christians only secretly don't believe in God, but they just want reassurance in times of suffering,
right?
Or they want to have something good happen. Exactly, but that's okay. Having hope in the face of suffering is a nice benefit of believing in God, but it may not be the number one impetus for someone believing.
Yeah, and false hope can be more dangerous than dealing with the reality of the situation at hand. It can delay you having the life that you want and accomplishing what you want to accomplish, and helping the people that you want to help and being the change you want to see in the world. It is, God. But it's just, like there's this idea. When I went to India, there was this idea that India is going to be fine because it's all part of a plan. And what really hit me when I was over there was that has to be the case, because if it's not, then this place is awful. And these people's lives are wildly unfair, especially compared to us. And so, trying to make the world better for them is, I think, a human responsibility, which is the basis of humanism. And this scripture, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They do abominable deeds. There is none who does good. Like, that is just such a divisive thing to have in your religious text, because it completely discounts non-believers who have a human ethical basis of compassion for others. And it's a real thing that happens across all cultures and time. And it's something that's a human trait, not just a religious trait. But it's this like false monopoly on morality that can be really frustrating when you talk to believers.
Yeah, like somehow we atheists, because you cannot have a basis for morality outside of God. Anything that we do that is good by any measure, helping people, donating to the poor, giving our time. That's the God in us. That is, we have this divine sense of morality that we are applying without even knowing it. But then everything that we do that is bad in their eyes, well, that's because they're filthy, sinful atheists.
Yeah, and what's kind of striking to me is believers in one religion, they'll point to other believers, believers of other religions as, they kind of assume that they're moral because they're basing their morals on the religion of their God. But if you, as a believer in, say, Yahweh, if you don't believe that Allah exists, then the person could be basing their morality on anything. And the religious morality has such a dangerous tone to it, because especially if there's no actual physical basis for it, then you are blindly following rules that don't have a logical reason behind them, because they're just given to you as an authority, and so you don't have a good reason for what you hold as moral and sacred and whatever. And so, in humanism, at least you are valuing human beings for its own sake, and you're doing good deeds for their own sake, and whatever you hold as a moral thing, you have a logical reason behind it, or you would change your mind. And if you're basing your morality on crime and punishment, then it's not real morality.
Yeah, and when you look at the gamut of world religions and lack of religion, and you can have people from all different walks say the same things. Like, you can have a Christian say it's good to give to the poor, and you can have a Muslim say it's good to give to the poor, and you can have a secular humanist say it's good to give to the poor. Maybe that's because that's not a God thing. That is a human being thing. That is a human civilization thing that we figured out over the years.
Yeah, because it's across time. It's also across culture. No matter what religion you have, most people would be on board with that. If you have no religion, you'd be on board with that. And so that's another thing, that there's plenty of human traits that transcend across the religious divides. Things like transcendent experience, and things like morality, and things like, an aversion to pain, an aversion to seeing other people being in pain, and all of that. That's something that is a human trait that in psychology, if you study somebody, it's not going to drastically change their human reaction to something like that because they're a Muslim versus a Buddhist. They are human beings, and we are wildly the same. We are so the same. And there are so many things that are much more similar about us than different. And so it takes away from the vast coming together of humanity. It's so divisive, this religious divide.
Yeah. We're going off on one of our trademark Atheist Edge tangents here, but I'll just say this last bit, because we were talking about that individual who grew up restricted behaviorally.
Sorry, back to the topic.
About 15 minutes ago, we were talking about this person who that they grew up with the restrictions of belief, and then they just go apeshit when they get out in the real world.
Yeah.
And people look at that as a consequence of atheism, where now they don't have these standards. But I think that is a consequence of people being brought up in the church with absolutely no sense of moderation of behavior. There's only don't do this, don't do that.
Yeah.
And that really doesn't prepare someone for the real world, because unless you're going to live in a bubble your whole life, which you can and people try, you're going to start experiencing some things that you realize that your overly restrictive upbringing was incorrect about.
Yeah.
Like if you're like the classic. We had this joke in my Christian university of don't have sex, it'll lead to dancing, stuff like that. That was our that was a silly.
What does that mean?
You know how like a Footloose kind of side note, dancing is horrible and whatnot, but like somehow joking that dancing is worse than sex somehow.
Oh.
Like we didn't take it that seriously. That was our haha. Aren't those other Christians who believe that? Aren't they funny?
I see.
But
I don't think I've heard that.
Probably a good thing. But if you're like we know from Texas especially that abstinence-only education doesn't work.
Oh.
Just saying no to sex.
Don't get me started on that.
Yeah, we'll have another tangent of that. I'll make another video out of.
I don't even need to get into
it. But the point being is, if you're taught just don't have sex, don't have sex, don't have sex, don't have sex.
And you're bad if you even think about it.
If you even think about it, then at some point you're going to have to reckon with your natural teenagerness.
Yes.
And at some point you're going to realize that, I kissed my boyfriend and we didn't burn.
Yeah.
Or
we didn't burst into flames.
Or he grazed my. I don't know why I'm taking the female perspective on this, but
go ahead.
My boyfriend, he grazed my boob, and we didn't have a hellfire rain down on us. Then once you realize that you can dip your toe into these waters and the bad consequences that have been driven into your head from years of church going, once you realize that consequences aren't going to happen, then you're like, okay, now where's the line?
Right.
Where's the new? How far can I go with this responsibly?
Right.
And there's just you have no frame of reference for that. Mm-hmm. And worst of all, you find out that it's pretty fun.
Yeah. Well, and you have to be secretive because all of your adults in your world are not on board with this behavior, and so it's a very black and white reality of all or nothing. And so what's so dangerous about that is that when teenagers do start to explore these things, they don't have any adults to guide them through that and to make sure that they are safe and informed enough to be responsible and safe, and these are things that are so important. And it's a human just travesty that these human beings are not given the tools they need to make sure they are safe throughout their entire lives and to make sure that they don't put themselves in situations that can be dangerous or emotionally traumatic or send their lives on a trajectory that they wouldn't have otherwise wanted.
Yeah, it's like you can't even have a dialogue about this stuff because if like just the word condom is a dirty word because it makes if you talk about condoms, people want to use condoms, and that's just absurd.
And abstinence only, while we're on the topic, real quick, it's just that it's said in a lot of these programs that condoms will progress AIDS and HIV and things, that they don't protect against this stuff, and that they're only effective 2% of the time, which is the complete opposite. If you use them correctly, they are ineffective only 2% of the time. And it's a completely false claim, and it's so damaging to teenagers. And the idea is that if you scare kids out of this completely, then they will not go after this at all. But what does happen is they become scared of safe contraception, and they damage themselves and each other. And it is awful. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, shoot, we just had the Supreme Court this last week come out and say, hey, it's okay for crisis pregnancy centers to lie to their patients, which is a whole other video. But yeah, it's all a mess. But bringing it back around to this topic, I hope we've made it clear, Christians, if you're watching this, we're not just in this for the sex.
Right.
We're just trying to understand the universe just like everyone else. And
the booze and the gambling and the, yeah.
That's great on its own, but it's not why we're here.
Yeah.
I mean, we have the roulette table set up just off camera.
Yeah.
I'm ready to lose all my money tonight, but that's okay. But
oh, can I just do one little quote from Stephen Fry?
By all means.
Stephen Fry and Christopher Hitchens did a debate against a few people from representatives from the Catholic Church, and he made this analogy that monks in priests in the priesthood of Catholicism, they abstain from sex for their entire lives, and there's this really intense relationship that they have around sexuality and around blocking people from that experience. And so he said that normal human beings, regular human beings, we have a healthy attitude towards sex. We like it, it's fun, and it can be, dark and dangerous, but it can also be really, really incredible. And the only people who, it's the same with food, and the only people who are obsessed with food are the morbidly obese and anorexics. And that relationship around sex in the Catholic Church is that relationship in a nutshell. And it was just incredible, because this idea that anybody outside of that relationship around sexuality and religion, that we're obsessed with sex. And no, we have a healthy attitude toward it, and making an obsession around it is what abstinence-only programs do to kids. It's just awful.
For sure. And yeah, I hope this helps y'all realize that people become atheists for a variety of different reasons. A lot of them are good, some of them are bad, but they're not all about sin. And I hope that as a Christian, if you're engaging with an atheist, that you will take the time to understand their motivations and not reduce them to a easily digestible stereotype, or be tempted to spout some sort of well-worn platitude at them rather than actually engaging with what they're saying. So. Yeah, so...
What'd you give me?
Thank you, Jeeves.
Thank you.
And edit here.